What's up, guys? I'm Crystal Lee Naomi, aka Jasmine Borders on Tyler Perry's Sistas. Be sure to subscribe to the Haves and the Have-Nots review for not only reviews on the Haves and the Have-Nots, but also on Sistas. And while you're at it, give your girl a follow on Instagram at Crystal Lee Naomi. And I'll see you every Wednesday at 9, only on BET.
All right, Sistas fans. Well, yeah, this video, my goodness. So earlier today, I spent a good deal of time kind of mapping out the details for my Andi is awful video. And that one turned out pretty well, but I was sitting here getting ready to edit that along with the episode review from last week and several other videos, but it came to my, I don't even know, my surprise because of the fact that it's not uncommon for me to come up with a new video concept after I finish working on another one, but given the fact that I thought the Andi is awful video was so complete, this just took it in another direction. I was scrolling on my phone real quick before I sat down to edit, and I noticed the trendy meme of this time being the villain, or the person you thought who was the villain versus the actual villain. And I saw the one about Sistas again. I think it was like Danny is supposed to be the villain who we thought was the villain, but it turns out it's actually Andi. And I thought about it. I just sat back and I jotted down some notes. I'm like, Andi is an awful person. I agree, but is she the villain of Sistas? Is, you know, I don't even know what to title this video. Should it be like Andi is the real villain of Sistas, or is Andi a victim or a villain? It's very complex. So in this particular video, you know, the Andi is awful when I talk about a lot of the various things that Andi has done, which demonstrates her more of a, well, bad friend, a person who it really is questionable whether or not you can trust her, and a person who uses others. Not as good as she thinks herself to be. But then again, the question is, does Andi really see herself as a good person? Or does she just see herself as someone who wants something and she goes for it regardless of the consequences, but then when the consequences come down on her, she wants to play victim? There's a lot to dissect. I never thought I'd really go this in depth with Sistas before. I honestly thought my conversations on the show would be more about the whole relationship aspect, you know, giving my thoughts as a male based on like a female show, you know, how men are portrayed, or, you know, are women in the wrong? It's like, is this, you know, when I say woman, I'm like addressing one of the characters in the show. Like, is this woman the problem of the relationship? Is the guy being honest and he's not a bad guy? There are just so many things, but I never thought that I would be breaking down Andi on such a level because of the fact that there are just so many layers to peel back. So let's go ahead and do the intro real quick. If you are new to the channel, or you've been here a lot, but you've never managed to take a couple seconds to do so, please hit that subscribe button. We just hit 150,000 subscribers, trying to get to 200,000. Then after that, you should see a little bell right beside the subscribe button. Go ahead and click it and select all. That way you are notified whenever I post to the channel. Trying to get to at least 50% of my channel watch time to be from subscribers. That way, you know, it looks good. We have more people who are subscribed and more people who are notified when I post content. And to round it all up, you know, go ahead and follow me on social media. Links are in the description below. And if you like the video, hit the thumbs up button. Trust and believe. I would say a goal for the video, like 500 likes or whatever. Honestly, I don't care. I'm more concerned about your thoughts on whether or not Andi is the victim. So let's get the conversation going after the video is over. What I want to do is kind of present the case of the characters in Sistas who Tyler Perry, I feel like, wants the viewers to believe are the quote unquote villains of the show, you know, or the person we should be rooting against. It's like, you know, Andi is the person, you know, we should be rooting for. Like, Andi, you know, she's gone through, she's a, you know, a black woman. She's one of the only few black people in her field. and at the law firm and this and that. Let me just say this much. This video is not to undermine Andi's struggle or the struggle of any black woman. It's well aware that in the working world, women have it harder than men. And if you throw on being black on top of that, black women have a lot to deal with. Not saying or trying to undermine the struggles of other genders and races, but, black women do have it rough out there. And given the fact that I believe it's been stated there are 4 black people who work at the law firm, Hayden and Mike from Bruh. Mike is from Bruh. They're the 2 male lawyers. Fatima is like the Andi's assistant, and then you have Andi as the only female black lawyer at the law firm. So right there's a lot riding on her. So let's go over the suspects. Man, this is great. If you follow me on Instagram, I did a lengthy Instagram story where it's like Thanos and Andi. I'll get to that, but I just want to break down who the show is trying to place in front of us as, hey, this is the person who's bad, without us really knowing that one of the titular characters could be the real villain. So Lorenzo, I didn't put him in a thumbnail mainly because, well, 7 photos was enough because it looked good when you have Andi in the middle and then like 3 characters on both sides. So it was like 6 supposed villains and then Andi's right in the middle. Lorenzo, to me, when I think villains of the show, I'm talking characters who really impact others. Like Lorenzo is a monster, but that's more focused on Maurice, and then Maurice is besties with Sabrina, so that conflict and that villain arc seemed more focused on that particular character and their journey. Like Maurice survived discrimination and he's still standing. So Lorenzo is indeed a villain, but I don't think he's like the main run. When I'm talking villain, I mean like the front runner, like the person who's like the Giovanni to Ash Ketchum, or the Frieza to Goku, or the Toguro to Yusuke Urameshi. Look, I've been watching a lot of anime over the past couple of days. I need to give my brain a rest from all this work. So, Morris and Jasmine allegedly have double teamed in order to get Gary, and then apparently Andi is a pawn in all of this. And then you had Leslie hired by Jasmine to assist in getting dirt on Gary, anything in order to, I guess you could say, make her case. So when she files for divorce, there's a more likely chance she can take everything she can from him. So in a way, Leslie was hired by Jasmine and Morris to get dirt on Gary, kind of in the same way that Oscar was hired by higher ups in the Haves and the Have-Nots show in order to get dirt on Charles to ruin his campaign. And I believe we learned that Oscar was hired by the current administration in order to get dirt to ruin Charles so he couldn't win the White House. So in this case, we have Leslie, who actually turned out to be more of an ally than an enemy, because she knew Andi was being railroaded, and as a result, Andi was kind of spared. And we know that the files that Leslie gave Andi could exonerate her from the charges from the FBI. So, wow, I didn't mean to go through that many characters in one sentence, but there we go. So Gary is meant to be a villain in the sense of, well, he's jealous, he's possessive, he's a cheater, he set up Andi. Did he really, though? I mean, let me just say that based on everything we know, especially, during season 1 especially, it doesn't seem like Andi was forced to do anything she didn't want to do. It definitely seems more like Gary was a demanding type, but Andi went along with it. And then you got Bellamy, who was allegedly involved with the Morris and Jasmine scheme. So I guess you could say you have Gary going after Andi's heart, and then in order to get her in the workspace, you have Bellamy. So that's why he kind of forced her into the situation that despite the conflict of interest, Andi was going to represent represent Jasmine in the divorce. So there's a lot riding on that. And I'll get to Bellamy in a minute, because believe it or not, and I don't want to spoil anything because I really wanted to save this part of the video. A lot of the character, okay, you know what? No, let me save it. Then you got Danny, who arguably in season 1, she was like the troublemaker in the group. Now, that's not to say she forced the women to make bad decisions when it came to, like, you know, Sabrina, Calvin, Karen, Aaron, Andi, Gary. It's just that she felt like she was being disrespected by her so-called friends, and as a result, she kind of, you know, isolated herself from them and pretty much didn't care about them. And honestly, I really didn't care for the way she was acting. Remember when Leslie busted Andi and Andi was crying at her apartment because she found out Gary was actually with a bunch of other women? And then, you know, the girls came over, but then Danny just wouldn't stop running her mouth because she was trying to make the entire situation about herself. True, Andi put herself in a position that she put herself in. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's not like, I told you so, this ain't the time, girl. This ain't about you. See, y'all keeping stuff from behind my back. No, but then in season 2, Danny is more of the good person of the group. I don't know. But all I'm saying is Gary, Jasmine, Danny, Bellamy, Leslie, Morris. Believe it or not, are the question. Look, if I was wearing a blazer, you know what? I should have recorded this video in front of the camera, but yeah, that would have been a great concept. I would have put on some, you know, glasses with the lenses popped out and my blazer like, Your Honor, I like to stand before the court today to exonerate these 6 individuals. Look, I keep getting notifications from people right now because they're seeing my story about Andi being the villain, and it's getting fire right now. So these individuals who were meant to be the villains, the bad guy, the toxic characters of Sistas, they aren't as bad as Andi. Because when you look at the core, all of these characters, believe it or not, they've tried to help Andi on multiple occasions. I know I'm speaking to somebody right now. Gary, Jasmine, Bellamy, Danny, Leslie, Morris. Every single one of these characters has tried to help Andi multiple times in the series. I am not playing. Look, I didn't go so far as to write down episode numbers and stuff like that because, yeah, that definitely would have been helpful. And I feel like the concept for this video would get the eyes of like some of the Sistas cast and whatnot. So if you're a cast member watching this, just know usually I'm more, I guess you could say efficient, but I'm just going to name specific examples. Kind of like when it comes to the Bible, you know, years of growing up in the church and studying seminary and whatnot. I can't spit out verse numbers or whatnot, like Isaiah chapter 12, verse 5. I can't do that, but I can recite biblical stories like it's nobody's business. See what I mean? So I can name different scenarios in the show, but I don't have the titles ingrained in my head unless it's like one of my favorite episodes. But Morris. Okay, Morris, I picked him first because honestly, he's like the worst one on the list considering he tried to assault Andi in the back of the parking lot. So yeah, that doesn't look good. But he tried to help Andi in the sense of explaining the game to her. I know that it definitely seemed like he was belittling her in regards to, you think that you got your job at the law firm, or you think that you won all those cases because you're intelligent, you're capable. No, it's because you look good. The board, the men, they have the power. They look at you as a hot piece of, okay, let me just, it's Sunday. Let's not get too far. I'm starting to sweat myself just talking about, okay. You know, Andi, you know, the way you walk, the way you look in that courtroom. See what I mean about women having to deal with more than men? I'm not saying men aren't the victims of, like, you know, sexual misconduct in the workplace, but women, you know, especially if you look good, you gotta prove yourself even further. Basically undermining everything that Andi has accomplished because it's only because she looks good, not because she's a damn fine attorney. Once again, it definitely seems like Morris is trying to belittle her, but at the end of the day, he was actually giving sound advice in regards to how the game is played. Now, Andi doesn't have to play the game by the rules. I mean, you could essentially say that Andi opened the box of Twister and decided to throw the instructions behind the couch and play the game her own way, but then wondered why she kind of twisted her ankle because she put her leg behind her head. Look, okay, I know that's a weird example, but I was trying to think of like the equivalent of somebody telling you exactly how something's done, but you're going to do it your own way. It kind of happened to me earlier today when I had a microwave dinner. I threw the box away, and then after 2 minutes and 35 seconds, I'm like, damn. How much time is the recommended? So I had to dig in the trash again. We've all done it. Don't judge me. So Morris was actually trying to spit game at Andi in more ways than one. So Morris actually tried to help out Andi, but in order to get revenge, which I loved it, she did her own digging to find that Morris, she wasn't the only victim of what he tried to do to her in that car. So in a way, Morris taught Andi that you have to fight dirty in order to stay afloat. So check mark to Morris because he actually helped Andi. I'm not lying. He helped Andi. Look back at season 1, which should be on BET Plus, by the way. Hopefully it gets uploaded soon. That was a great season. All right, let's go over to Leslie. This one is quick and easy. Basically, number one, well, I know that she turned into an ally, so to speak, but then again, she's made it clear that she's attracted to Andi, so that could be another reason why she wants to help Andi, but you know, more or less, that actually goes back to what Morris was saying about how Andi's looks could be a reason why she succeeded so far. But basically, she was working for Jasmine and Morris in order to track Gary. And then, you know, that's how Leslie found out about the whole affair thing and the fact that Andi's just caught in the crossfire. Like, look, I know this whole situation's bad and I'm trying to help you, believe it or not. So all the times Leslie would pop up, it definitely felt like she was the villain, someone who was tracking. Well, I mean, hell yeah, that was right. At one point, she was tracking Gary's vehicle with Andi on the inside of it. I think that was after Gary beat the hell out of Morris in the back of the parking lot for what he was trying to do to Andi. And basically, well, yeah, it wasn't until after Jasmine fired Leslie that Leslie truly became an ally, if you will, to help out Andi. Like, even that phone calls, like, they're coming for you. Who's coming for me? And, you know, then she got arrested. So, well, not arrested, but detained by the FBI. But then they just made her walk. And we still don't know how far she had to walk, but my gosh. Leslie actually turned into an ally. Like, remember, Leslie was looked at as an antagonist, someone who was on Jasmine's team. Because, don't, look, I'm getting to Jasmine in a second. Crystal Lee, Naomi, if you're watching, don't worry. I'm going to redeem your character. So Leslie was a person who was working for an individual to trail her cheating husband, who was actually cheating on his wife with the woman who's supposed to represent her in the divorce. Even though we later find out that this whole thing was arranged by Morris and Jasmine to get dirt on Gary in order to help them in the divorce to get more money. And tomato. Let's get to Bellamy real quick. We know that the people in the law firm don't seem to like him, specifically the black individuals like Mike and Andi, Fatima. Hayden, I don't think we've fully gotten an idea of what he thinks of Bellamy, but let me just put it this way. He made it clear several times to Andi in the early episodes of season 1 that he took a big gamble putting her in that position. So basically, don't make him look bad. Don't make him regret that decision. Essentially, it's a point where I'm not going to say he doesn't like black people. I'm not going to say that at all. I just feel like he will let you know if he stuck his neck out for you, you better not disappoint him. I kind of feel like that's where he's at, especially if he aligned himself with Morris and Jasmine in order to get more money. I think Leslie broke it down in episode 24 of season 1. It's when Leslie and Andi met at like a bar or something, and she gave Andi like the folder with all the details in it. And basically, I think it was like a team up to help pay off. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, didn't they say something along the lines of he needed the help paying student loans or something? I know I laughed my ass off because I was like, well, I mean, I got student loans my damn self, so I know what it's like. You got to do what you got to do. And then it got to the point where Morris stopped paying Leslie, and then Jasmine fired her. That's why, you know, she's going to help Andi get revenge on them. Bellamy, I believe it was in like episode 6 or something. I know it was like the cliffhanger ending where Bellamy went to talk with Andi to congratulate her. It's like, look, your case with, I forgot it was the woman in like episode 1, actually. The first scene where Andi was shown, badass scene where she pretty much got her client multi-millions and the house, more than she actually wanted. And that impressed the law firm so much because I believe that was like the biggest settlement in the law firm's history. And it was going to result in Andi getting a pay raise and everything. But then when she talked about how it's a conflict of interest with Jasmine Borders, that's why Bellamy pretty much, you know, put her in a position where she has to do it. So it's a setup in a way where Bellamy was trying to set up Andi to win. Once again, I think it was Hamilton that, well, see, I watched Hamilton 3 days ago for like the 18th time since it was on Disney Plus. It's like, I know it was the song, The Room Where It Happened, and it was something that's like, if you want to stay in the game, you got to play in the game. Basically, you got to play dirty in order to end up with a clean trophy. Okay, I couldn't think of a good analogy right there, but essentially, Bellamy was trying to get her to play ball, which we later learned in a recent episode where he was trying to tell her about the $1 million settlement. Even before that in season 1, towards the end, where she got suspended or got fired, but then said she's going to quit and quit and then fight the law firm. She tried to out Bellamy at the boardroom table with some of the board members. And once they left and talked with Bellamy one-on-one, you know, Bellamy was saying, look, I was trying to vouch for you in order to get you a letter of recommendation, in order to give you a huge severance package and whatnot if you kept your mouth shut. But that little stunt you pulled just ruined it. And then the more recent episode, oh yeah, I just said the $1 million settlement. So even though Bellamy is a slime ball, I mean, don't get me wrong, I was always contemplating the whole, I mean, should Andi take the $1 million settlement? Should she have taken like the severance package that Bellamy was trying to get her back in season 1? Should she have just played ball, shut her mouth about the whole conflict of interest thing? It's one of those situations where $1 million isn't going to sustain you for a lifetime. Now, I mean, there are some factors that come into that, like your living expenses. Like, would you blow half the money on a house, a car, and everything, or would you live pretty much, you know, below your usual level of comfort, so to speak? Like, it looks like Andi has a nice apartment, a nice car, and everything. I mean, I'm not saying, if it's just like you, there are a lot of factors. Like, for example, I'm 29, single, no kids, no relationship or anything like that. $1 million, I'm not going to lie, I could probably balance that out, assuming I live to like 75 or something. Just because I know how I am. I'm not just going to sit around and do nothing, but at the same time, I think I'd be able to stretch out $1 million. But the thing about it is, well, if you deduct student loan, oh Jesus, that would take a big chunk right there. I think it would just suck for Andi because she's like a strong-minded individual who fought hard to get where she, you know, is right now. So to take that $1 million settlement is almost like a spit in the face to everything that she's worked for and earned, regardless of what Morris says. So if she takes the $1 million, then what? Will she just, you know, start working at another law firm? Will she just stop working completely? I don't know. But I think there's a lot to contemplate as opposed to, whether or not $1 million is all Andi would ever need. Now, I'm just saying it probably would have been a safer bet for her to take that $1 million settlement than it would have been to take that $250K from Gary. I'm just saying. So when you look at it from all these various angles, some of these villains were actually going to help Andi out either financially or through the old-fashioned method of just giving their 2 cents. Morris was giving her a reality check in regards to her career choice, in regards to working with this specific law firm, giving her the advice about how she's viewed with the very colleagues that she works with and works for. Bellamy was like an extension of that. Bellamy was just reinforcing what Morris was saying all along about how you got to play ball in order to stay in the game. And like I said, Andi decided to fight dirty by pulling a Leslie, basically using detective skills to get the dirt in order to hold your position while somebody feels like they have an upper hand against you. Hence why she was able to dig up other victims who have dealt with Morris trying to assault them sexually because of his drug habits and whatnot. And then with Bellamy, she had the recorder on her in order to get him to incriminate himself. Now, when it comes to Danny, she does run her mouth a bit too much, but at the end of the day, she gives tough love. She'll say the things she feels you need to hear, not necessarily the things you want to hear. Because I will say this, I'm not advocating for Andi messing around with someone who's a married man, especially messing around with someone behind their wives' back, I feel like Danny was pretty much, let me put it this way, Marvel reference, not Thanos, but remember in Age of Ultron, I remember when Age of Ultron came out, arguably the worst Avengers film out of the 4, but still enjoyable for what it was, even though I've only watched it like 3 times. I've watched more scenes from that movie than actually watching the movie consecutively in one sitting. But I remember there was a meme floating around that, if Pepper Potts was in Age of Ultron, there would have been no Ultron. Like Tony Stark would have been like, hey, let me make Ultron. No, like that would have shut it down right there. I bring that up because if Andi just hadn't made the bad decision and decided to only really talk with Karen about it, I think that if Andi brought the subject of messing around for married man to the women, all of them, Danny, Sabrina, they probably would have shut it down. Now they probably would have made the joke, well, Danny, what about you that time you messed around for married man? Well, yeah, that was different. It was an older man and whatnot. I'm not saying that would advocate, Danny from, being a hypocrite, but at the same time, she would recognize that Andi herself is too smart to make a dumb decision like that. That's what I think. I think that if Andi would have brought this to the, not the tribunal, well, technically tribunal, because she's bringing it to the other 3 women of the group, not just, herself. I think the girls may have been able to talk more sense into her, because it's easier to talk with somebody who's going to validate your decisions and see that's what it is like when you're. I don't know why my freaking phone's going off. I have it on silent, but it's still making noise. Essentially, oh yeah, somebody else is responding to my story on Instagram. The whole Andi Thanos thing. Let me just get a little personal here. If you've been on the channel long enough, especially during 2019, that was not an easy year for me emotionally, because within the span of 3 months, January to March, when I tell you friend zone, rejected, chosen, somebody else chosen over me, I could not win to lose when it came to women. In January, what was it at? Oh yeah, that was the live stream. I cried. I remember somebody's like, hey, the haves and have-nots is coming back such and such a date. They just posted. I'm like, no, it didn't, but let me refresh my Facebook. And I remember a girl I was crushing on at the time and was talking to updated her status to a relationship. What the fuck? And then she ended up marrying the guy like 7 months later, and I was like, well, fuck. So then fast forward to like, I want to say like February. I was at the mailbox. I'm talking like the mailbox at the apartment complex. Girl rolled up on me. It was somebody I knew, and we hadn't talked in like 2 years. We were never officially a couple, but we hung out a few times. And turns out she was only back at the apartment complex because she used to live here, hence why we used to hang out a lot. And her boyfriend lives in the, one of the buildings. That's why she was there. And I'm like, oh shit. So she was like, oh yeah, it was great talking with you, and we'll link up soon. I'm like, all right. Now I'm thinking to myself, man, probably not a good idea. So then the next day, she literally messaged me. It's like, yeah, you know what? I changed my mind. We've had too many problems in the past, and I'm not interested in being friends. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, you came up with me. And then in March, oh Lord, I got friend zoned hard. I got ghosted after I told a girl I liked her. And then I literally had to sadly do the double down like 3 days later of no response. I'm like, you know what? My bad for making things awkward. And then she finally sent me a paragraph explaining, well, that's the worst. Just literally friend zoning me in a huge paragraph. Like, I was just horrible with women in that. After that, I was like, fuck it, I'm done. I'm only focusing on work. And I mean, technically things are going well financially for me. So I guess in a way that was a wise decision. But at the end of the day, emotionally, I'm doing well financially, but I'm emotionally bankrupt when it comes to feel. That's a good one. I don't think I've coined that phrase, but I think I've heard it somewhere before. But it really defines my situation. But the reason I bring this up is when it came to that part of my life, I remember just venting a lot. Like, I had a couple friends I would talk to about this stuff. But then as time went on, I just started thinking, like, you really only, especially after you've been rejected or you feel like you've been wrong, you only want to talk to individuals who you feel will validate your feelings. They won't tell you what you need to hear. You know they're going to tell you what you want to hear. It's like, you're the victim. You're the one who were wronged. It's like, and then when somebody tells you, well, I mean, you need to put yourself out there more. You can't text a relationship into existence. Like, shut up. I know how I feel. Shut up. It's like, you don't want to hear that. You only want to hear somebody who's going to, bounce back exactly like you're right, Jeremy, you were wrong, or you're right, Andi, so-and-so was wrong. It's like if Danny would have been there to say, you shouldn't be messing with that man. It's like, well, you knew messing around with this man will put you in a position. Like, nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear, even though they need to hear it. So Danny was definitely trying to be a good friend with advice. So there you go. Danny was trying to give. Then when you get to Gary, that's a mixed bag. Yo, y'all tearing that story up. Okay. Gary is a mixed bag. You could argue that Gary was he keeps trying to say, I'm trying to give you the world. I'm trying to give you everything. I'm trying to give you love. And then it would have been really awkward if Andi would have accepted that marriage proposal, even though he was still married. So I really don't know how to make heads or tails of that. And plus, we don't know if he's fully, let me put it this way. I'm not 100% sure if Gary is like innocent when it comes to the whole money laundering and all this stuff he was arrested for. But the one thing we know for sure is he's guilty of being a jealous, possessive man-child. So there's that aspect of it. But he's tried to give Andi like $100,000 after she was kind of let go by the firm or on suspension. He just recently gave her the box for $250K. So you could argue that Gary has tried to give Andi both financial and emotional security, even though he's severely insecure himself. So yeah, Gary did try to give Andi stuff. And then finally we got Jasmine. At the very core, Jasmine has tried to give Andi advice multiple times. And it turns out that, when Gary showed Andi the farmhouse and everything, that's when she had the flashbacks to Jasmine, and she actually still resonates with Jasmine's advice. Like, even the last time that Gary and Andi were together, the week before last, in the cliffhanger where Andi goes to see Gary, and, you know what? She told me you're like this. Like, you're still talking to her? You know what? Forget this. So Jasmine's words actually resonated with Andi a lot. Now, yes, Morris and Jasmine. I mean, would I say they set Andi up intentionally? I don't think so. I think that they knew Gary would try to get some lawyer, and then Andi was just a pawn. She was just caught in the crossfire. The Andi was just the icing on the cake, if you will. So Jasmine actually tried to say, let me put it this way. At the very least, Jasmine was trying to save Andi from heartbreak when it came to dealing with Gary. You know that's kind of messed up. You know you're making bad choices if the wife of the man you're screwing around with behind her back is trying to actually give you sound advice about Gary, yet you neglect to listen to her and you continue to associate with him. That's pretty damn dumb. So, all that's to say, the most notable antagonists of the series aren't as bad as, well, look, I know there's 4 main women, but I think it's safe to assume we all agree that Andi is the main character. Yeah, the main character is actually the real villain. Believe it or not. I know, like, it's popular to kind of talk about these kind of things. I remember a couple years ago, what's it called? The Film Theory or whatever? Like, this channel on YouTube that, like, it's just a theory, a film theory, and scene. It was a very good channel. They're pretty big. And they did this video that broke down how Troy Bolton is actually the villain of High School Musical. Either it was Troy or I think the title was like the real villain of High School Musical, where Sharpay is actually not the villain. I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You gotta look at Andi and you gotta look at the things Andi has done. Now, I'm not saying she's done FBI levels of crime, even though she was technically involved with the whole money thing. So there's, well, you know, that kind of kills my argument. Even though Andi's alleged crimes as a villain aren't as extreme as throwing someone over a parking garage or extorting money from people or trying to force herself on someone, even though technically it's debatable as to whether or not she'll do that to Paris next week. Let me just say that Andi ain't a saint. And you're probably wondering, well, where does Thanos come into it? You look at Infinity War, that's literally Thanos' story. The Avengers are just the end. It's almost like, I mean, there are so many moral breakdown videos about Infinity War and Endgame of how the Avengers are more like the antagonist while Thanos is the protagonist. And I'm not going to recite all the stuff here, but I feel like Sistas is about Andi's story. Andi is the Thanos. And then you have Thanos with the children of Thanos, the Dark Order. That's essentially Danny, Sabrina, and Karen. And they pretty much carry out the wills of Thanos. And you could argue that love, money, success, those are like the Infinity Stones that... I know this sounds stupid, that Andi wants to put in her gauntlet. All I'm saying is kind of interesting when you think about it. It's like, at least Thanos was on this quest feeling like he was the prophet. He was the one who saw that the universe needed to be saved. And as a result, gather the stones by any means necessary, wipe out half the universe, and then I'll rest. When it comes to Andi, she doesn't see herself as the villain of her own story. Now, I did a very lengthy episode breakdown for episode 23 of Bruh, when it came to the conversation between, or was it episode 22? It was basically the conversation between Andi and Mike. And yes, Andi has appeared in, I think, 4 episodes of Bruh. And all episodes of Bruh on BET+. So make sure you check that out next week. Because Ruthless comes back on Thanksgiving, which is the 26th. 3 new episodes of that, so there will be 15 total. And Bruh's already got their entire season up on BET+, just to give you a heads up. And she pretty much talked with Mike about how men, it's like, you know, what's the problem with men? And he's like, well, yeah, we're immature and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, exactly. But women, some of y'all like that too. And as soon as Mike is like the asshole of the group when it comes to Bruh, but he was actually being sincere and being, well, very objective or subjective to that conversation. Like, I don't know what the right word to use is. I think objective is the right word. It's like, well, hey, to make it a fair conversation, we're not just going to talk about, we're not just going to have me talk about how men were dogs and everything, and then you just agree with it, because sometimes to have an objective conversation, to look at things from both sides, you need to look at maybe some of your girlfriends, or maybe even you are foul in some ways, and that could be why you're having relationship issues. She shut that down real quick. So I feel like when you look at a person like Andi or Thanos, no one can tell them they're wrong. They will find a way to twist the words or twist the narrative where they're the person who's in the right. Kind of like Gamora was telling Thanos, like, you don't know that wiping out half the universe is going to save it. Like, who are you to assume this? I'm definitely going to watch Infinity War after this. I'll probably have it playing while I'm editing. I think that Andi is just one of those people who just sees themselves not as perfect. I wouldn't say perfect, but without fault. Or technically, wouldn't that be the definition of perfect? Contradicting myself. And I've said it looking at season 2. I've just noticed a trend when it comes to Andi's character. Like, there have been so many times where I feel like Sabrina is like the gal pal of the group because she wants to maintain the peace. And even though, Danny is like the outspoken one of the group, she's the one who's going to tell them what they need to hear. Like that clip of Sabrina, am I stupid? No. What the hell? No. Just tell her yes, because I get it. In times like that, you don't need a person who's going to say I told you so, that kind of thing. But sometimes it is good to say, well, at the very least, you just made a poor ass decision. Because I think Andi was like, I was just trying to follow my heart. Am I stupid? No, not at all. And I'm like, the fuck, Sabrina? Like, she almost cost you your job. And I've already made a video about whether or not Sabrina should be exonerated of that, even though her boss said that you did nothing wrong, even though technically she didn't follow proper protocol. But that's neither here nor there. And now she got her safety deposit box. So all I'm saying is, you got to look at how Andi treats people. That's honestly, how do they say that? It's like you know a lot about a person based off how they treat people, like how they treat the janitor compared to a CEO, how they treat their mother or their siblings or whatnot. I feel like season 2 is really bringing out the worst in Andi. Like, I feel like she's a fed up. Who sang that song? Was it R. Kelly? Like, when a woman's fed up. Na 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 na. I know that's like a bad reference to make, but dang it, I grew up with that music, so too late to talk about it. I know it sounds like I have one of those shots they had at that club, but remember, I don't drink. I think in season 1, we were really seeing Andi dealing with the consequences of a bad decision, which is being the mistress in an affair and being confronted with the wife of the man you're screwing around with. And her whole thing the entire season was dealing with the fact that, okay, business and pleasure have now collided and I'm miserable. So she had to juggle the fact that she had to keep the secret about the affair. She had to deal with the fact that her career had been jeopardized due to her decision making. And then the possibility being part of an elaborate scheme / setup, and she's caught in the wildfire. And then she literally lost everything at the end of season 1. Yet in season 2, she doesn't really seem like a woman who lost everything. I mean, Sabrina gave her that pep talk in order to take control of her life again. But the problem is, it's almost like, when it comes to marriage, like, oh yeah, he's getting ready to get married, they're gonna have the old ball and chain. It's almost like, they say sometimes when you're elevating yourself in life, you have to let go of certain people. It isn't always about putting yourself above others like you're better than them, but you just realize that some people come into your life for seasons. Like, there are people I know from college and whatnot, like, I know I keep saying like a lot. I'm sorry about that. They basically are together, but then they break up. I mean, what's that saying? Is like the right love, but at the wrong time. Sometimes you outgrow each other. Like, you want different things. Like, a couple in freshman year might end up the junior year. Like, you know what? I'm in a different direction. Like, I don't see myself living in this state or that state or this country or whatever the case may be. And their careers and their decision making lead to them splitting up. But then sometimes down the road, they might break up in like 2012, but then find themselves again in 2018 and get together because the right love at the wrong time. It's just one of those situations where Andi has a way of just choosing the wrong path. It's like the Waynes going down Crime Alley, a dimly lit area that, has criminals in it, as opposed to walking on the lit sidewalks and then they got killed and Bruce Wayne became Batman. It's like you're picking the wrong deals. I mean, what was his name? Ben, aka Tom from Bruh, even though it was portrayed by the same actor. I mean, he wanted to link up with Andi. You had Paris who wanted to go to dinner with Andi. It's like there are multiple times where these single, relatively good dudes, even though we don't know much about them, they wanted to date Andi. But oh no, I'm in a serious relationship with someone. You are messing around with a married man who's put off getting divorced for like months. Just what are you doing? So it's almost like that still I know I keep, flip flopping from like, oh, let's talk about Sistas to this random narrative. It's like that story like, the flood and then the woman's on the roof and then it's like I'm gonna wait for God to save me. It's like, here's a boat. No, I'm gonna wait for God. Here's a plane. Nope, I'm gonna wait for God. And then she goes to heaven and it's like, well, God, why didn't you save me? It's like, I came to save you in the form of that guy who was, had the boat, or the person who had the plane, and you just wouldn't get on, so you died. I feel like God was sending Andi so many life rafts when it came to escaping Gary. He's like, here's Ben, here's Paris, but no, I'm just going to stay with the married man who's possessive, hasn't divorced his wife like he said he would, and stuff like that. And more often than not, Andi was a victim. She was being treated like trash by, Gary, because he would belittle her in terms of her feelings, her career path, would end up blaming her. Like every time Andi would stand up for herself, she would kind of be slapped down, verbally by his words. Like, Jasmine said he was physically abusive and whatnot. I'm not inclined to believe that at the moment. I mean, I feel like if there's any kind of abuse, it's because he's possessive and he's like an emotional abuser rather than a physical one. Because yes, Jasmine has scars and bruises, but we know that her and Morris have a thing and he gets high. So that's probably what happened to her. But I will say in that scenario, yes, Andi definitely was a victim. But at the end of the day, that was from her own decision making. So I will say that, yeah, season 1 definitely kind of painted the narrative of one bad decision has led to all these consequences. But season 2, it's like, I feel like the biggest problem with Andi is the fact that she really hasn't humbled herself. Because even, going back to what I said before about, the ball and chain, like Gary weighing her down, it's like, you can't save both of yourselves. It's like, you have to realize that there's a strong possibility that Gary is guilty. Like, Andi, what will you do if it comes to, past that Gary's actually guilty of all the crimes he's been arrested for? At what point, what will you do? Like, that $250K, will you keep it? Like, let's say you get all your things. That's another thing. I really wish he didn't keep that $250K, because it seems to me like she's going to get everything back once the file folder is recovered by the FBI and they find out that Andi is innocent. Because I do know that once she gave over the bank numbers and whatnot, that huge transfer came in, but then all the money was repossessed by, I think, was it the FBI, or did like the business manager for Gary just take all of Andi's money? I forgot. But I do believe it's been stated that the FBI does have possession of all the money. So let me just say, I think it's very possible that Andi will just get everything back, like the car, the money, the phone, the apartment, all that stuff. If that's the case, take that $250K, give it back, and just say to hell with Gary, and then that's the end of that. Like, you can move on. Sure, your reputation has been tarnished, but at least you've been exonerated from all those crimes. That's one good thing that will come out of this. But you got Andi really acting like she can just treat... Andi's biggest problem for me is that she cries wolf, she cries victim when it comes to, men and how they treat her. But she doesn't really treat men well either. I feel like that's one of the biggest reasons why I look at her as a villain. Like, not only is she a bad friend, but she's, well, a bad woman when it comes to how she treats men. It's like, what did it say? It's like, it takes respect to get respect. And not to just point out Andi, because, her and Karen both have their little black books, their F-boys. Like, I think the, what's it called? Like, Old Reliable. Like that one episode where, or Old Faithful. Yeah, I think it was Old Faithful. Yeah, see, that was one of the episode titles I remember. And, Karen and Zach had a fight. Then Karen had a condom and, called over the one dude. And he literally told her off, like, look, I'm engaged. I'm getting married soon. I can't do this anymore. I'm worth more than this. And he walked out. And then, Andi said, oh, I got Old Reliable too, but I haven't seen him since I got together with Gary. And then, she talks about Paris in season 2 at the opening episodes, like, oh, once I get this whole thing dealt with Gary, maybe I'll call up Paris. Then she has this huge falling out with Gary after earlier in the episode telling off Paris, but then calls him up later as a rebound, and now she's drunk and wants to have sex with him. See, it's like you can't treat men a certain way and then act all upset when men treat you in the same fashion. Literally, it's like you were Gary's side chick, and now you're just using these guys as side dudes. Like, it's like, take a number. Andi, you're doing this to your own self. It's hard to feel bad. It's like, I don't really feel bad for Andi in a lot of these situations. I still do feel bad for the whole Morris thing. Like, going back to that. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention. Gary was trying to help Andi to save her from getting involved with Morris because he knew what kind of guy Morris was. But given his jealous track record, it definitely seemed, I don't blame Andi for not trusting Gary in that situation. So I will say Gary was indeed trying to give sound advice, but his prior actions to giving said advice is why Andi didn't trust his judgment. She's lucky that his possessiveness actually came into being an asset to help her out, excuse me. So when you look at the whole friendship dynamic, go back to the Andi is awful video. I kind of break it down how Andi pretty much, really is a kind of a bully of the group. I mean, sure, Danny runs her mouth, but for the most part, she's really telling the truth. It's the truth that nobody wants to hear. It's like, Danny will tell it like it is. Karen will just, tear you down. Sabrina is trying to keep the peace, and Andy's like kind of the stuck up one, to be honest. Kind of the bougie one. We all got a friend like that. And I mean, she really only wants to talk to Karen, someone who's going to, for the most part, agree with everything. The one thing that's consistently brought up by the other women is the fact that, they don't want Andi to be in a similar situation like she was in college. That's the one thing they really will agree on. But I think that Andi is I don't want to use the word opportunist, but I think she needs to recognize her own faults, her own flaws, and that would possibly make her more of a redeeming character. I really want to see her win, but not until she starts making better decisions. Like, I remember, what was it, at the end of episode 1 of season 2, where Gary was on the phone from jail, and when they finally hung up, she was like reaching for the phone. I remember a lot of people going like, I know she ain't reached for the phone. That was actually a pretty big moment. Like, I know it's kind of funny and it's annoying to see Andi do that, but that really speaks volumes to her character. And like Paris even said in the recent episode, you just had a falling out with your guy, but that doesn't mean it's over. Like, that's literally what it boils down to. Like, give it time to cool down. She will probably talk to Gary again. That's honestly where I see this going, because of the fact that, not to quote, I think Selena goes, the heart wants what it wants, will wants. She's going to try to get back with Gary again. Possibly. We know Gary ain't going to let her go because he wants to have money. But I honestly think that they're probably going to end up together again. I don't know if it's going to be like official, but they're going to end up screwing around in some way, shape, or form. But for now, Gary's definitely singing the tune of, bitch better have my money. So, yeah. This video was a whirlwind. I mean, honestly, I don't even think if I'm fully done. I mean, we have an episode coming up where it definitely looks like Andy's going to make even more questionable decisions. Now, obviously, I feel like Paris probably knows what this was. The fact that Andi was angry, noticed he was horny, she was drunk, and they had sex on the couch. And the mama's going to come in and break up the party. Andi, what are we going to do with you, Andi? So, with all that's to say, do you think Andi is the real villain of Sistas? Do you think Andi is the... Now, I don't think I'd go so far as to say she's the worst character on the show. I mean, like I said, there are some foul things that she's done, but there are other characters who have done things that are more villainous. But I mean, really, it's the villains who have a friendly smile. They have this one demeanor in public, but behind the door, closed doors, they're even bigger villains than, you would originally think. But I think for me, another big thing is how judgmental she is despite her own faults. Now, I remember there was this one particular episode in season 1 where Karen and Zach were just going at it back and forth, and Andi was in the front seat. I think this was, I forgot the episode title, but it was the one, these people stop messaging me. it was the episode after the whole Morris assault, and I think, Andi was going home, and Zach asked. Now, I'm not going to fault Andi for this, but Zach asked for Andi's opinion, and she pretty much laid it on him pretty thick. The truth, the fact that, look, I forgot exactly what she said. It was profound. It really was. But at the same time, when someone says the same thing to her, she doesn't really listen. It's like, what do they say? It's like, you hear me, but you're not listening to me. Or is it you listen? No, I think it's listen versus hear. But essentially, it's like there are people in Andi's life. Like sometimes they aren't the people you think they are. Like they don't have a Benz. They don't have a mansion like Gary. Like Paris seems like he's a good dude. Like we don't know a lot about him. I mean, we just recently learned that him and Aaron are bowling buddies. And Aaron did show some concern over, Andi, not only was she drinking too much, but, going home with Paris. Like, hey, Karen, you want to go with them? It's like one of those things where you just really feel like that's the thing about all these. Look, say what you want. Tyler Perry shouldn't write a women's show. Look, we're looking at Tyler Perry shows as a whole. Every character has a story. I mean, any good storyteller will, utilize that. It's the fact that these people come onto the show and they seem nice, they seem genuine, but there's something they're hiding. Like maybe in the present they're a good person, but they had a checkered past. Look at Derek on the Haves and the Have-Nots, for example. When it comes to Aaron, I still don't trust that mother. I don't trust him. I don't trust him. But it's people like that who get the women because they look good. People like me, we just got to scrounge for the bottom of the barrel. And, you get rejected in friend zone. Whew, if I drank, I'd take a sip right now. I bust out the Welcher Sparkling, non-alcoholic, but it's tasty. I really think that Andi needs a wake-up call, but the problem is, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I apologize. People like Paris, who don't seem to have a lot, but at the end of the day, they seem to be honest people. Or Ben, her former colleague from college, a former a law student like her, wanted to take her out. No. She chose to be in a toxic situation. She has been facing the consequences for said decisions, and she wants to play the victim card. She basically wants to pity party around. She wants to lounge around and do nothing until Sabrina just essentially said, get off your ass. Fight for that life you work so hard for. It's almost like she's willing to work for every area of her life, like her career and whatnot, but she's really not willing to work on the emotional steps, basically the emotional parts of her life. She needs to recognize that I deserve to be in a relationship where I'm loved, where I'm trusted enough so my man isn't against me going out with my friends, isn't against me talking with another man, especially if there are a colleague at work. I think Andi really needs to deal with some skeletons in her closet. I really think that's really one of her biggest things. She needs to recognize when people are there to genuinely help her, and she needs to learn to listen to said advice, whether it be from a Leslie, hell, even from a Morris. I'm not saying you have to take that advice to heart, but at least listen to what he's saying. Yes, asshole. Yes, try to come on to you, but he was really telling the truth. Hence why a lot of people were giving her flack about leaving that voice recording of Bellamy at that boardroom table because that's some leverage right there. Like the dude said, hey, Hayden, you contact the FBI and look into this. I still wouldn't trust these people. I would have definitely carried that recorder with me or at least made copies or something. But I really do think that Andi, KJ Smith, you're amazing. We've had some chats in the past. Very amazing talent, a great person. But when it comes to Andi, she's awful. She is the villain. She is the Thanos. I'm not saying I want you beheaded. You should have gone for the head. No! Look, I'm totally buying Stormbreaker when it comes out next month. It's like $160. I'm saving up for that. So I do think that Andi is the kind of person who she's not going to open her eyes until it's too late. I mean, you literally lost everything at the end of season 1. And I really was saying season 2 is going to be the new Andi, and Andi who's not taking shit from no one. But it isn't just her taking crap from anyone, but she's also going to make the necessary changes in her life to be a better person. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet. Sure, she got the pep talk from Sabrina she needed. Like, I gave Sabrina flack for the whole, you're not stupid at all. But I gave her necessary praise when it came to her telling Andi she's a fighter. Get out of this bed, go down to that job, and get your life back. Well, your career back. That was great. But I think that Andi really needs to work on how she treats others. She doesn't use others. She doesn't disrespectful. I mean, the way she called out Aaron for the whole recovery thing, like the whole, wait, you're a recovering alcoholic and you're at a bar. Karen, you didn't tell me. I'm like, oh my God. Part of me wants to blame it on the drink, but another part of me is like, nah. Andi said that. She knew what she was saying. He's sitting right there and you say that shit. See what I mean about being disrespectful? See what I mean? It's like Andi could just let it fly out of her mouth about Aaron. It's like, Karen, nah, nuh-uh. But then when like Danny tries to tell you about, hey, you shouldn't have been messing around for Mary Man. Like, no, Danny, shut up. I don't want to hear that. You're a mean one, Miss Andi. Yeah, I was listening to Christmas music this week. Judge me. So, I can go on. Maybe I'll do a part 2. I think maybe, as the season goes on, if more notable scenes or decisions are made, I'll probably do a part 2. But this video was fun. It really was. I know it was probably way longer than it needed to be, but this is my channel. I don't care. So, with that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Is Andi the true villain of Sistas? I mean, like I said, Danny, Jasmine, Gary, Bellamy, Leslie, Morris, they've all done questionable things, but at the end of the day, they tried to help Andi out. It was just her own poor decision making that made her not decide to take their advice or their money. All money ain't good money, I will say that. But when you're hearing advice, when the wife of the man you're screwing is trying to help you out, and you just, you know you're wrong. All right, I'm done. So make sure you let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Please like, subscribe, cut the notification bell on, and follow me on social media. Links are in that description box below. Shout out to the patrons over on Patreon supporting me outside of the fluctuating YouTube ad revenue. If you want to donate directly to me, feel free to do so on PayPal or Cash App. Very much appreciated. It is not mandatory. Unlike BET Plus, Netflix, or Disney Plus, this YouTube channel is free. You just come on here and click, and you listen to me talk about the ramblings of villainous female characters. There you go. Thanks so much, guys. Let me know, are there any other videos like this you want me to do? Speaking of the haves and the have-nots, I did one recently about what happened to Candace, and I talked about her, I guess you could say, a decline of the quality of her character. I heard you in the comments. I will be doing a part 2. And I also have a Veronica Harrington video coming out as well. I got a lot of stuff coming up this week in terms of videos because trying to work my butt off since the week of Thanksgiving. It's very unclear what my schedule is going to be. Like when exactly I'm going home. And then I know that's the return of the haves and have-nots. And Ruthless is coming back. So next week is full of uncertainty, aside from the fact I'm going to be stuffing my face with food. So thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it if you can get this video out there. If you can tag KJ in it, tag Tyler Perry, put it on Facebook, do whatever you want. Let's try to get to some traction on this video because maybe I'll do a Jasmine video or a Danny video or something. I mean, you tell me what you want. It really depends on how big this video blows up. Thanks so much, guys. I'll talk to you soon.